Hey, welcome to the Big Me Kickoff. After a week off, I am back. It is your host, Kevin Noon. Not the Big Noon Kickoff, it's the Big Me Kickoff for those of you who may have just found the show, and it's the Ohio State Open Week. So we don't have an opponent to talk about. I think we've put the Maryland game to bed. So let's look at something maybe bigger picture in terms of national college football. And with all of that, I'm going to a longtime friend of mine, Braden Gall, Athlon Sports, 440 Sports, everything else. You've done a lot. I've known you for a long time. I was thinking about this today, just how long we've known each other, even though we kind of veered and went our separate ways after those corporate days at Rivals. But how you doing, Braden?
I'm great, man. Yeah, for anyone who's ever heard a take of mine and disapproved of it at any point, this is the man you have to blame. Kevin Noon hired me at Rivals.com in 2005. I have not left the industry. That cannot kill me. I'm still here, but it's all your fault, buddy.
Don't put that evil on me, Ricky Bobby. But
Great to see you, man.
Yeah, exactly. We'll get into another common friend of ours that we can't get out of the industry as well, but we'll do that a little bit later. I want to bring in Braden, who I think a lot of our viewers are already aware. I've had a couple say, you're bringing on that SEC homer. Maybe he'll dispel a little bit of that. I mean, he is in Tennessee, but granted, he's in Nashville, and they just have Vanderbilt. So, I don't know if I could sit there and say that there's a huge correlation there. But what an interesting first 6 weeks of the season, I guess 7, if you look at that 0 week, that scintillating Brett Bielema, Illinois game that I immediately purged from my memory with copious amounts of alcohol. But, what are your thoughts of just what we've seen so far and what seems to be a pretty exciting season?
Yeah, it's funny, like you mentioned that game, because Nebraska has been like leaps and bounds better every single step of the way since that game. I mean, they almost beat Oklahoma, almost beat Michigan. They're playing significantly better football. Now, to your question, what is like sort of what's fascinating to me? I love chaos. I love when the card is turned over and we've got different teams vying for different spots in different places. I love the Big Ten race with how good everybody is right now. I think it's great for college football to have Iowa and Michigan State and Cincinnati and all these other teams sort of in the top 10. It's very 2007. I think you and I were still working together in 2007, which is still the greatest college football season ever. Kentucky was like number 2. South Florida was number 2. West Virginia and Missouri, I think, almost played for the national championship. Of course, Ohio State fans will remember that year, obviously with 2-loss LSU in the national championship game. But I didn't think we were going to get cooperation from Alabama and Georgia to sort of mirror that 2007 season, but we did. And Texas A&M beat them, and there's some real actual weaknesses there for Alabama, and it looks like everyone else has weaknesses too, with the exception of Georgia, who's mutilating people with a backup quarterback. So other than that, it's about the chaos and about the hopefully seeing some new blood in the playoff. And again, that's why I'm a fan of college football from coast to coast. Is it's just you never know what you're going to see on any given Saturday. And this season has been spectacular. It's been awesome every single Saturday.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to have the opportunity to watch a lot of games starting tonight. Well, actually starting on Thursday night with Clemson, Syracuse, and then you've got Oregon, Cal, and then Friday we've got some games. Everybody who watches the show knows I'm a big MLB fan, so I'll be watching that as well. So I'll be flipping around. We'll get into the college football playoff race in general here in a second, but let's dial in on Ohio State. They get off to a start. They start on week 1 on a Thursday, and kind of sleepwalking game against Minnesota, but they go up there to Huntington Bank Stadium, get the win, run into a little bit of a buzzsaw with Oregon, an Oregon team that doesn't have Kayvon Thibodeau, doesn't have a couple of its pieces, and everybody is ready to write the Buckeyes off at that point. I mean, C.J. Stroud is no Justin Fields. This is the worst defense we've ever seen. I'm not sure that they've completely fixed everything on defense yet, but they're well on their way. And then they come out, Tulsa, maybe not as convincing of a win as people would like to see, but if you talk to Akron, Rutgers, and Maryland, Ohio State seems to be rounding into shape a little bit. But again, it's Akron, Rutgers, and Maryland. We're not talking about Penn State, Michigan based on performances this year.
Yeah, I think So I do think we are extremely prone to dramatic overreactions. Go figure. In as fans of college football, you know, losing to Oregon. Like if you think Oregon's a really good team, like I do, I think they're a top 10 team. They might be the best team in the Pac-12. They might not. We'll find out. Arizona State has a chance to be that team. They've got a big game with Utah this weekend. If you believe, same thing with Iowa and Penn State. If you believe that Iowa is a great team, well, Penn State almost just beat them on the road with their backup quarterback for the second half. So, like, you have to sort of, if you view Oregon as a really good team, which I do, then you sort of have to look at that Ohio State game and go, look, that's just a great game. That's a great game between two really good teams. Ohio State's got a young quarterback who, of course, is going to have some growing pains. Ryan Day literally had never lost an entire game during his tenure as the head coach during the regular season. Sure, the defense, again, this is where like Alabama's offensive line questions this year are sort of similar to Ohio State's defensive questions, which are, is it a continuation of last season where you had like a historically bad defense relative to Ohio State standards, or is it just sort of some new pieces figuring it out, and they're going to be fine? Well, the defensive showing against Rutgers isn't all that impressive to me, but the offensive showing is. And they're number one in the nation in yards per play. Scoring like that against Rutgers isn't something Michigan did. Michigan State did a little bit, but Michigan didn't do anything in the second half against Rutgers. What I like about the performance against Maryland was the defensive side of things. 4.4 yards per play against Maryland offense, which, again, I don't think is extremely well coached, but is very, very talented. Very explosive weapons on that team. And so you do see the defensive metrics getting better and better. Granted, like you said, the schedule is not great. I think that's my question, and you may be more suited to answer this than I am. Like, how much of it is the talent, which generally is never a question for me with Ohio State, and how much of it is maybe just a down year, because Clemson's having a down year for the offensive line. Maybe Bama's having a down year for the offensive line. Wisconsin's having a down year at things that they're normally not bad at. Or is it the coaching staff and the play calling, which I know was an issue early in the season, who's calling the plays, who's in charge, that kind of stuff. So you might be more qualified to answer that than I would be. You're closer to the situation. But I have not, and I've taken a lot of heat, by the way. I've taken a lot of heat from Iowa fans and Penn State fans because I have had Ohio State number one in the Big Ten every week, including the week they lost to Oregon. I have not seen enough from Iowa on offense or Penn State or anybody else, even Michigan, or even Michigan State's offense is pretty impressive so far. But I have not seen any of those teams show me enough to outscore Ohio State. So I still have Ohio State higher in my rankings, and it just, been attacked by Iowa fans and Michigan fans for the better part of the entire season. So I still think Ohio State's the best team, and until proven otherwise, I'm not betting against that offense. And as we're seeing, the defense is starting to progress and get better every week.
Right, and I think part of the issue too is that you have Ryan Day wants that cover 1, cover 3, single high safety look, and I don't know if Ohio State's personnel is completely lockstep in being great for that. Ohio State loses Josh Proctor. It's a real lightning rod whether or not Bryson Shaw is the guy to be that single high guy. They're now under Matt Barnes are running a little bit more cover 2. Whether or not that's a case of Ryan Day just finally said, look, just run something, but let's fix it. Or, because we're not
Right.
seeing as much of a situation of where they're out there saying, well, we're just going to keep doing this. It's akin to going back to the old Simpsons episode where Bart and Lisa play rock, scissors, papers, and Bart's like, good old rock. Nothing's going to beat rock. Well, guess what? Cover 1 was not working. So now, if you go in and you look at the breakdowns, there's a lot more, they're not, pre-rotating. There's a lot of things going on defensively that I think are helping them. But then again, too, they face a Maryland team without Dante Demas. Their number 3 receiver gets hurt on the second play of the game. That number 3 receiver is their number 2 receiver. You don't see a lot of Raheem Jarrett in that game. Maryland just can't run. They just can't run the ball. I think they had less than 60 yards running the ball, but I think we'll see more come the end of the month. I think everybody was looking at that Indiana game saying, well, this is going to be, we remember 42-35. We remember what happened at Ohio Stadium. Michael Penix, not been good this year. Indiana still can't run the ball. Freifogel having a very un-Freifogel-like a year. I think they can still play some defense, but I don't see a scenario where Indiana, without a tremendous amount of help from Ohio State, is going to be able to put up the points that Ohio State does.
No, and it's fascinating you start talking about the scheme, because that's, as a nerd, like that's where my mind goes. And the teams you're going to have to beat, let's say, to run the table in the Big Ten, obviously with Penn State, Michigan. Nebraska might actually present a more unique challenge with Adrian Martinez's skill set. But when you look at Penn State, Michigan, and a potential matchup, let's say with Iowa in the Big Ten title game, if you're going to run a too high safety look, that's probably not going to work against those teams, because those teams are not like truly. I know Michigan State's yards per play are off the charts, and they've got more playmakers, and the quarterback's better than he's been in a while, and all that stuff. But Michigan, Penn State, Iowa, they're not going to scare you enough to where you have to have two safeties deep the entire time. You're going to have to. They will run the football just right down your throat if you're going to run the too high safety look. So I do find that to be an interesting dynamic, because there's a lot of sort of old school style in some of these offenses. Iowa's winning entirely with defense and turnovers. So I want to, that's interesting to me. But if you're forcing Spencer Petras to beat you throwing the football, I don't know. Like, that doesn't scare me all that much if I'm Ohio State's defense. It's more about, do you stay out of mistake-prone football? Do you on offense? If you do what you're supposed to do on offense, it's going to be hard for a lot of those teams to keep up, unless you just run a too high safety look and just give them the underneath stuff the whole time. And that's where I'll be interested. Like again, with Oregon, it's like they didn't, I don't know, like everyone in the world knew what they were going to run, and they ran it, and they still weren't in position, right? They're just going to run off the left edge here. They're just going to keep going off left edge until you do something about it. And I guess that's why they made some of the changes they made. But that will be fascinating with the physicality that Penn State, Michigan State, Michigan, Iowa, that they want to play with up front. What does that look like against an Ohio State front seven? How many guys are you going to have to drop into the box? What does that allow for them then to adapt over the top? Like, there's just so much juice there as far as like the nerdiness of the matchup. Indiana's not it for me. Like, that Penix has not been good. I don't even know how healthy he is. I do think the road trip to Nebraska is going to be far more interesting than people think. That team is way better than its record indicates, and they've got a quarterback who's finally lived up to the potential. I know we've had Ohio State-Nebraska matchups where we built up the hype in the pregame and it turned out to be pretty bad, but this is a different Nebraska team. They're very good defensively, and the quarterback finally looks like he gets it. So that's actually the one that would be sneaky concerning if I was an Ohio State fan.
Well, I agree with the Indiana there. Something interesting that could happen there. I'm just going to get out ahead of this because you're going to hear the story at length. If Jack Tuttle ends up being the quarterback, that was Chris Olave's high school quarterback. So you're going to hear all sorts of things about that. I've seen a lot of Adrian Martinez. I'm not sold. I'm not sold.
I know.
I've seen a lot of, we're giving the black shirts back out on defense. I've also sat there at Memorial Stadium and watched the fans release the balloons at halftime because Nebraska hasn't done anything. I know that they hung half 100 on Northwestern. I saw it. I saw it with my own four eyes. I saw it. Age is undefeated. Let me just tell you that, Braden. As we get older, age is undefeated. But I think that Michigan State is the one that is the game, and I've looked at Michigan State's schedule. And I don't think anything of Miami, Florida. So I'm not giving them a ton of credit there.
I agree.
They haven't played anybody. But Kenneth Walker he appears to be the truth. Peyton Thorne is tremendous compared to Rocky Lombardi and some of the other guys that they've had in that position. And, I think that when Thorne is playing well, I think Jalen Naylor can play well. So that's the game that if there's a team that has at least shown me the ability to put up points in bunches. And I think that's the way you have to beat Ohio State is get into that track meet and win that 49-48 game.
Yeah, I totally agree. Not over 9 yards a play against a Rutgers defense on the road. That's nothing to sneeze at, which is what Michigan State did last weekend, covering easily that spread, by the way. I agree. They are like, and that is one of the most surprising and shocking stories, I think, in all of college football. Like, I think this is how bad I had it with Michigan State. Just completely dead wrong. I think I had the under, like, 6.5 wins. Like, I've already lost that bet, and we're, like, in week 7, which is really hard to do. That is by far the most surprising, just how efficient they've been on offense. That is by far, like, Iowa being great on defense and winning with turnovers, that's that's like the same thing Kirk Ferentz has done for 20 years. So that's not a surprise as much. Maybe how good they are is, although their wins are not aging particularly well. If you look at their resume, they have one win over a ranked team right now. I'm with you on Michigan State, but you get them at home, right? So I think that's, again, until somebody beats Ohio State in the conference and dethrones them, I don't care that there are 4 or 5 teams ranked in the top 10. Like, it's still Ohio State's conference to lose. And I joke all the time with my Big Ten friends, like, the Big Ten doesn't have an SEC problem. The Big Ten has an Ohio State problem. And that has been the case since, like, the 50s. So it's not changing anytime soon. So until somebody knocks them off and can score with that team, I don't know. I'm with you. I think it's Michigan State, and I will acknowledge falling in love with Adrian Martinez and then falling out of love with Adrian Martinez and breaking up with Adrian Martinez and breaking up with Scott Frost. But they're playing pretty good football the last 3 or 4 weeks, and that includes almost beating Oklahoma, almost beating Michigan. Almost is a big word here, but they're playing much better football. So again, I wouldn't throw it out just yet.
I go back to a movie that you may have been in diapers when it came out, Beverly Hills Cop, and falling for the banana in the tailpipe trick. I'm not going to fall for the banana in the tailpipe trick again. And yeah. I've sat there and I've seen it. People so desperately, and Adrian Martinez has been in Lincoln for like 34 years. Everybody wants to have him on their Heisman list, wants to have this, wants to have that. I've gone through the Calabrasca movement. Oh, they're recruiting California so well because they don't have a natural recruiting territory there in Nebraska. And when they moved from the Big 12 to the Big 10, they lost their ability to recruit the state of Texas, but they'll get that. Well, a lot of people fell for that. That whole movement fell apart. Everybody talks about that Adrian Martinez is going to do this and Adrian Martinez is going to do that. And then you put him up in a big game. I'll say this. The night before that game, the night before I turned 50, they play on my 50th birthday. I'm going to be in Council Bluffs at the sports book. And whatever that line is, I may not make a mortgage payment because I'm going to hammer the crap out of it. I'm going to hammer the crap out of that line because I'm not falling for that. I mean, we have moved away from where Ohio State was scoring in the 60s and Nebraska was scoring in the singles. I mean, let's remember how this series started in the Big Ten. Yeah. Joe Bosman passing chart. We've all seen the meme. Ohio State gets up big. Braxton Miller gets hurt. Joe Bosman comes in, and it all falls apart. And I've got plenty of stories about that whole trip.
Nooner, I'm not trying to convince you that they're going to lose to Nebraska. I just got done saying I don't see anybody beating Ohio State. I don't see anybody beating Ohio State. I'm talking about styles make fights, right? And if you've got a pretty salty defense and a dynamic quarterback, I think that's how you have to beat Ohio State.
You have to have quarterback play, exactly.
And looking at, like, Cade McNamara's been okay. I don't think he's dynamic. Spencer Petras has been okay. Sean Clifford might be dead. We don't know. Like, I just don't see anybody on the schedule. Again, we talked about Michigan State's offense putting up 7.5, 8 yards per clip, which is insane. But it's a lot of Walker, right? And I know they went 300, 200, 200 last week. But the most dynamic quarterback who's playing the most dynamic football right now is Adrian Martinez. And I hate to say, I do not think anyone's going to beat Ohio State. So I want to be clear on that. I think Ohio State's the best team in the league. I've got them ranked number 1 in the Big Ten, if you want to call that a thing. I still am picking them to win the division. I'm still picking them to go to the playoff and win the Big Ten championship. So I have not wavered from that at any point, much to the chagrin of Iowa and people in the state of Michigan fans. So.
Well, let's take it a step backward and let's go talk about the game. Ohio State and Michigan. It's in Ann Arbor this year due to COVID outages. Michigan did not come down to Columbus. Ohio State fans are salty. We're not that far removed from the story that was out there about Ryan Day talking about wanting to hang 100 on these guys because of some disagreements between Day and Jim Harbaugh. We've seen 6 games of each team. I have a lot of Michigan acquaintances. I don't know if I'm friendly with many of them, but a lot of acquaintances who are like, I don't care, this is the year. But I just sit there and I point right back to Rutgers' second half. I'm like, if you couldn't do this against Rutgers, what makes you think you're going to be able to do it against Ohio State?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think again, you need a dynamic quarterback. You probably need some really physical line of scrimmage play. You probably need a good defense. And they've got some of those things. The way they've run the football in the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season has been incredible. But to your point, what do they have, like 77, 80 yards, something like that of offense in the second half against Rutgers? They were completely shut down. So I still watch Cade McNamara and I go, okay, it's better, but is it good enough? And I just don't see it. I don't see it. I think you need more dynamic playmaking because, again, like one of the things, and I can't remember who said it. It might have been, I don't know if it was on like game day or if it was on the broadcast of the game itself, Klatt or Herbstreit. I can't remember. Somebody said this. Basically, Oregon has the speed to run with Ohio State. And it's not a complicated formula, but who in the Big Ten has that kind of speed? And I know it's an overrated term and sort of a cliche and like a baseline thing, but that's been the problem with Ohio State and the rest of the conference, like I said, for 70 years. This is not a new problem. I love Iowa's defense. Michigan's almost as good on defense. I think if I'm a Michigan fan, I really like that we're under the radar, that we're undervalued, that no one's paying attention to us, that we're winning close games against Nebraska, that Jim Harbaugh's not running his mouth. Like if I'm a Michigan fan, I want all of that stuff to happen because as soon as anybody starts paying attention to us and they start adding hype and we start running our yaps, that's when Michigan tends to be shut down pretty quickly. So I don't know what that means for the game itself, but I'm with you. I don't see a matchup. Maybe on the road if Michigan is 10-1 and it's for the Big Ten East Championship, maybe you get them into a tight game. Maybe they dirty up the game a little bit and make it close. I'm trying to come up with ways that again, I think it comes back to quarterback play at that point. In which case your freshman quarterback is no longer a freshman. He's played, I guess he wouldn't have played all 12 games, but he's played most of them. He's played a full season of football at that point. There's nobody that can cover that amount of weapons. I don't think, maybe except for Georgia in the entire country. I don't know how you keep up with Ohio State. Again, I'm a broken record here, but they're the pick to win the Big Ten. Like they still are today. They were at the beginning of the year. They're going to be at the end of the year when they play Michigan, barring a complete defensive collapse. Again, which we're watching Alabama's offensive line collapse in front of our face. I still think they could turn it around and run the table too. So it's just barring a complete defensive collapse. I don't know how Ohio State doesn't make it through this stretch and get to the Big Ten championship game.
Throw an interesting point at you, and I think I've seen you on Twitter talk about it before, but could we, even with the Alabama loss, could we see a college football playoff that's comprised of just two conferences? Could we see the Big Ten send two, and could we see the SEC send two? I mean, okay, I understand we have an undefeated Wake Forest. It's Wake Forest. I'm sorry. The Wake Forest fan might get mad at me, and I'm Kevin at BuckeyeGrove.com. Well, that's my old email. Maybe I'll just give you my old email. You can find me. Wake isn't going to be there. The Pac-12 is falling apart. I think Oklahoma is a little bit of smoke and mirrors still. I think that the move to Caleb Williams is a smart decision because I just think that Spencer Rattler wasn't ready. But could you see a scenario if that happens? And how quickly after that are we to 12 teams if that's the case?
Well, what's funny about the anti-SEC Texas Oklahoma expansion thing is the Big Ten is sort of the linchpin in all of this because it's in their best interest to expand. And this is a perfect example. This year is a perfect example. Now, again, I will say I think there's a whole lot of losing left to go. So I think there are going to be upsets we don't expect. Teams are going to lose games we don't expect all across the country. That's the beauty of the sport. We're just way ahead of the curve on losing. We've had 40 teams, ranked teams, lose in 6 weeks, which is a AP poll era record. So I don't expect that trend to stop, which means this is what's interesting about the Big Ten, because the Big Ten will benefit the most from expansion along with the SEC. So let's just be honest about that. So if push comes to shove, hey, the Big 12 and the ACC and the Pac-12 are saying, no, let's not expand. Like the Big Ten and the SEC are going to say, we're going to do what we want to do, and that's expand. And the Big Ten is the only league outside of the SEC that can say that. I don't like Alabama would have to run the table and beat Georgia. And I think the only way it happens in the Big Ten is Ohio State running the table and beating Iowa, who's undefeated in the Big Ten championship game. And I'm not sure how much faith I have in any of these teams, except for Georgia and maybe even Ohio State, to get to the Big Ten championship game undefeated. Now, Could Michigan State, in theory, lose once and then get there? It depends on who they lose to. Iowa's got some wiggle room because then they have a chance to get Ohio State in the Big Ten title game and then come back with one loss and beat Ohio State and still get in. It's real. What's interesting is the Big Ten being so good at the top might actually help Alabama, which means, are you just going to beat each other up? Are you just going to keep taking losses, right? Like, if you just keep taking losses and all of a sudden you've got 2 one-loss teams in the Big Ten title game, well, then you only have a chance to get one in. That's actually how Alabama gets back into the playoff, is all the things you're saying about the Pac-12. They beat each other up. Oklahoma loses. Oklahoma State loses. Nobody in the ACC is relevant. Cincinnati just doesn't get the love it maybe deserves from the committee, although I would argue play somebody. And I that's actually how Alabama gets back in, is if the Big Ten just keeps cannibalizing itself because everybody's so good that they can all lose to each other. And that's a concern for the rest of college football, is Alabama just sort of sliding through to Atlanta, because the West hasn't changed. They're going to win the West, unless they lose to Auburn, I guess, which is possible. Then they play Georgia and Atlanta, and if you knock off Georgia and Georgia's 12-0 and Bama's the SEC champ, they're both getting in, folks. And unless somebody goes clear through the Big Ten, you need 2 teams to go clear through the Big Ten, and right now nobody's going clear through anything, including Alabama. So I don't know. That's a tricky one. I don't see it. One loss. How about this? Let me ask you: 12-1 Iowa versus 12-0, 13-0 Cincinnati. Who's the better team? It's probably Iowa.
There's just been such an anti-group of 5. I mean, you not only do you have to do it, you have to do it better than everybody else. They have the game against Notre Dame. Notre Dame isn't what everybody thought they were going to be, but I could have told you the second that they trotted Jack Cohn out there that they had some serious issues. You knew that was coming. They end up having an out-of-conference game against Indiana. Indiana isn't that good. So even if you sit there and you say that the Cincinnati program is trying to get these games, they're not getting any help from the teams they brought on. Indiana is playing like Indiana football, of what we're used to seeing. Notre Dame is just having a bad year, and I even though everybody points out, well, they should run the table on everything else, I don't know if they are. Whoever it was they played last week, it was, I can't even remember, like NC State or something like it was. I mean, they should have lost. I mean, they oh no, it was Virginia Tech. Notre Dame should have lost that game, in my opinion. So
no, they have no offensive line. They can't protect the quarterback. They need to change quarterbacks. They can't run the football like they used to. They're just not as. They've had some really good teams. They're just not as good as they used to be the last couple of years. Also the Indiana thing was interesting. Cade Womack is down there at South Alabama doing a really nice job defensively, and Indiana clearly misses him. There's no question about that.
Absolutely. Let's jump into the hot seat. Ed Orgeron probably tops everybody's list. I mean, the only seat that might be hotter than his is Urban Meyer in Jacksonville, but
don't get me started about Urban Meyer on this particular show.
No. That's not. There's a time and place for that, and this is neither. This is neither of those.
He is. How about this? He is one of the greatest college football coaches of our generation, and I will stop talking after that.
There you go. And I know the family, and I don't need. Why are you bringing people on there being so mad or being so ugly to Urban? No, we're not going there. So who are some other coaches that might be, on that hot seat, whether it be Manny Diaz at Miami, whether or not that, you can pry somebody like Mario Cristobal away from Oregon. I mean, obviously we already saw, the other shoe fell in LA with USC, but we love, it's kind of like in NASCAR and talking about the silly season. We love talking about coaching moves 7 weeks into the season.
Yeah. I think a lot of it depends on what USC and LSU want to do with their next move. And some of it actually following those moves, like it's the dominoes that I think are interesting, because obviously James Franklin's name is going to be attached to both jobs. I will say this. There is a coach in the SEC who is very well respected. And if a coach in the Big Ten who's been around a very long time happens to have a really historic season. Maybe it ends in a trip to the Rose Bowl because they didn't get into the playoff. Who knows? There is a coach in the SEC that I think would end up taking that job instantly. If Kirk Ferentz retires, Mark Stoops will be the Iowa coach. That is sort of what I'm hearing. James Franklin will be a candidate at LSU. So now we're looking at the dominoes. Would Mark Stoops be interested in Penn State? Would they be interested in him? So I think there's a lot of dominoes that when USC and LSU are as big of jobs as they are, it's almost impossible to project the domino effect after that. I don't think LSU, Scott Woodward, the AD there, he's a big game hunter. Like, he's not going to go after Billy Napier at Louisiana, even though he might be the best guy for the job. He's going to go try to make a big splashy hire. Cristobal is a perfect example. Can you pry him away from Oregon, where you've got some pretty unique circumstances with Nike money and the facilities and the way he's recruiting on the West Coast? They're clearly the most talented and most athletic team in that conference every single year that he's been there. That's an advantage for him. So is it worth coming down to LSU and dealing with all the drama of Baton Rouge and the SEC West and Nick Saban? Maybe not. I mean, maybe it's not. So I do
hear
find
James Franklin to SC. That's the rumor that I hear, and I've heard Mark Stoops attached to LSU, but the concern there is that the AD does like the big game hunt, as you mentioned, and is Mark Stoops a big enough name and draw? But I talked to a buddy of ours who's down there in Baton Rouge who said that after a couple of cartoon characters of head coaches with Miles and with Orgeron, that, you know, maybe they need to get somebody in there that's a little bit more of the grown-up in the room, and I think Mark Stoops would fit that bill a lot better than potentially some of the other guys out there.
Yes, but you know Iowa people, and Iowa people love Iowa. And he is an Iowa grad, and he's quoted Hayden Fry the entire season. You know, every press conference it seems like he's quoting Hayden Fry. Eventually, Kirk Ferentz is going to retire. I don't think he would go to Penn State and then to Iowa. You know, like that doesn't make any sense. I'm with you on Franklin to USC. James Franklin is just he is just an absolutely fascinating character. Like, he's just, to your point about why we love to talk about this stuff. Like, coaching searches are fascinating because they're like these little high school prom dramas, but at the same time, James Franklin is like do Penn State fans love James Franklin? I think so, depending on the day. I'm not really sure sometimes. I think some fans would be okay with him leaving to go to USC.
Oh, yeah.
If you're James Franklin, though, and the reason you left Vanderbilt is to go win a national championship in front of 100,000 people, there's no better place to do it than Penn State. It's your home state. It's the best place to put. No disrespect to Ohio State fans. I think the whiteout in Happy Valley is the number one atmosphere in all of college football. I think LSU's.
I don't disagree.
I think LSU and Penn State are 1 in 1A. They're number 1 in 1A, in my opinion. And I don't know. Like, if I'm James Franklin, the only reason you leave is if you think you're not as safe as people think you are, if that makes sense. Because otherwise, you're not going to get 100,000 people at the Coliseum going bonkers like they go for you at Penn State. Like, they don't care as much as Penn State cares. So I don't know. He's a great salesman. He is a hell of a recruiter. I don't know how he manages the end of games. I got questions about that. And again, you're right. The dominoes with James Franklin are going to be fascinating. And if he leaves, where does Penn State go after that? And Mark Stoops is a factor in all of this. He's a huge factor in all of this because he is as stable and as mature and as like normal a football program as you can build is what Mark Stoops has done at Kentucky. And it's a tough place to do that.
Right. We've gone a little longer on the show than I anticipated. I apologize for that. So we're going to bust through the last two things. As we sit here and, you know, kind of at the halfway point, some teams have 7 in the bag, some have 5 in the bag, most have 6. What are you most interested to see the remainder of the season? I know that's such a broad question, and you know, we could sit there and we could take it down to conference by conference, we could take it to team by team. But what, you know, Mr. Chaos Theory, loving to see the chaos out there. What are you most interested in?
I mean, I could shill here and pander if you want me to and talk about the Big Ten East because it is fascinating, right? With all these teams with the 0 still in the loss column. You know, I might go off the board a little bit here because I am pro chaos. I want to see. I think it'd be cool to see Iowa, Arizona State, Georgia, and I don't know, pick somebody else to go into the playoff. I think that would be fun and good for college football. People would like to see that, even if it would mean a Georgia death march to the national championship. I think offensive line play, I'm going to throw this out there as a weird thing that I want to keep an eye on. Clemson's having major offensive line issues. Ohio State had offensive line issues at the end of last season. Alabama's having offensive line issues. Like, are we in a random year where offensive lines just aren't as good? Again, I mentioned Wisconsin. What do they do better than anybody else? Develop offensive linemen, and they can't block anybody. Notre Dame can't block anybody. I am fascinated by the offensive line play in college football. And is it a function of anything in particular, or is it just a completely random storyline that's leading to some of the chaos that we're talking about? Oklahoma, Texas, like these Georgia's even got a couple. Like, if you're going to poke any holes in Georgia, which they don't have any, it's maybe the offensive line. So, you kind of can look around college football and draw a thread through all of the chaos. And to me, it's offensive line play, and on top of that, then quarterback play. And we don't have clear-cut Heisman favorites right now. I mean, Kenny Pickett might be playing better football than anybody in college football. He's plays for Pittsburgh. So I think it's offensive line play packaged with quarterback play, and what does that mean for the playoff race moving forward, which I find utterly fascinating. And I know it's kind of a nerdy answer, but that's sort of what I'm watching right now.
Absolutely. I think that offensive line is huge. I think that quarterback play means everything. I'm just waiting to see the rest of these upsets, because every year we get around mid-October and it's like, oh my God, what's going to happen? We're going to have 7 undefeated teams.
I know.
Somebody's going to get left out. I mean,
Preach.
Okay, if you're out of the group of 5, that probably is going to happen, but it always finds a way to work itself out. We're at the end of the year, 2, 1, 0. I mean, it works its way. It works. The situation fixes itself. So I think it's just a matter of what the chaos is. I'm curious to see what the committee in Grapevine does, because I joke about this all the time, that there's certain teams out there that their good loss is better than your good win. So, it just kind of happens that way. And when you lose matters. Ohio State loses week 2. If you lose week 10 and you fall down the board, do you have enough time to work your way up? So I love following all that. I'm going to mull my way into that room in Grapevine one day so I can listen to these conversations, because I just think that every year the committee has a different personality, and I think it has a different set of goalposts, and it just kind of depends on who the loudest voice in the room is, in my opinion.
After all this conversation, it's just going to be Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, and Oklahoma, right? Like, it's going to be end up being the same 4 teams that have always been there. We're just sweet.
Clemson's out this. Yeah,
we're just taking Clemson out and putting Georgia in because they've recruited the best defense in America or whatever. So, like, I'm with you. I'm rooting for chaos. I do think good losses are important to track. I think that's important. Like, Ohio State's loss is good. And here's what Ohio State fans and nobody else in America wants to hear. That Texas A&M loss is going to age extremely well for Alabama. A&M they're going to be favored in every game the rest of the way. They've got a really good chance to be a 9-3, 10-2 team. And I would not be surprised that if Alabama gets to Atlanta, that Texas A&M is 10-2 and sitting at like number 9, and everyone's like, oh, that's actually a pretty good loss, a 3-point loss on the road to Texas A&M in a crazy environment. So nobody wants to hear that, but look at A&M's schedule. They're going to be a heavy favorite in almost every game. So losses age better than others, and I'm concerned it's just going to be Georgia, Ohio State, Oklahoma, and Bama. But hey, if those are the best 4, let's put them in. So
there you go. Talk about a lot of talented teams. I want to throw back in the history book to a talented team when you and myself worked at Rivals Radio with a third compatriot, Chris Childers of Sirius XM. Which nickname do you call him by? This ridiculous show pony garbage, or is he man-child?
So did you coin the man-child thing? Was that yours?
Maybe.
Okay, I think that might have been yours. I just call him Childers, really. I definitely don't call him show pony. There's 0% chance
I refuse to. I think he unfollowed me because I told him I wouldn't call him that.
Well, that's ridiculous.
He's a very little petty guy. He's
quite the diva. So I guess the show pony moniker fits. No, listen, I am still pretty close friends with Childers, and I still love the guy. And his idiosyncrasies and my idiosyncrasies, they definitely clashed back in the day. But as we've grown up and gotten all old and boring and had kids and Now we're like grown, mature adults, sort of. I still love the guy, but definitely no chance I'm calling him show pony. No chance.
I refuse to.
No
I refuse
chance.
to. I mean, it's man child, and there were some jokes that went along with that I don't want to sit there and not be able to get advertisers, so I'm not going to tell those on the air.
Can I tell your audience though that I learned how to cuss in playing football growing up in Texas, in high school. I learned how to cuss playing football, but I got a graduate's degree in cussing in 2 years working at Rivals for you. So I just want your audience to know that I still have some one-liners that I pull out from time to time that make a sailor blush that came directly out of your mouth. So I just want everyone to know.
I'm getting old. As I said, I'm turning 50 soon. I don't remember anything. It was a different...
Sure.
I'm surprised we got stuff on the air. I'm honestly surprised we got stuff on the air sometimes. And it wasn't because we had fantastic facilities. We worked with a lot of great people. But I was shocked that we made air.
It's because I was the best producer Rivals Radio's ever seen, and that is a fact.
Wow. And I was the best executive producer that Rivals Radio ever saw. But Braden, I want to thank you. Tell everybody how they can connect with you on socials, just some of the things you're working on, and we'll send everybody off.
Sure. Every single Saturday, ESPN Radio from 10 until noon, previewing games, gambling picks. Myself, Joe Fortenbaugh. That's all across the country. Athlon Sports Cover 2 podcast, which is a national college football podcast that we do. We talk about every single team, every single conference, all 1:30. And you can always argue with me on Twitter at Braden Gall. My social media, addiction of choice is the Twitter sphere. So come on in. If you want to take time out of your day to tell me how awful I suck, I am honored by that. Come on in. Bring it in, baby. I love it.
There you go. He didn't sound like much of an SEC homer there. So to the people who said, why are you getting Gall on? I can't believe that. Take that. Ohio State won in terms of the Big Ten. We'll see where chaos theory takes us. We'll see what happens. But Braden, thanks a lot for being part of the show. And I want to thank everybody out there for watching the show as well. It's the Big Me Kickoff. Enjoy the open week, and we'll be back next week to talk about Indiana.